Welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Window. My name is Harry Durham. Let's go through the biggest transfer news of the day with talkSPORT chief football correspondent Alex Crook. Crookie, I woke up this morning. Julian Alvarez, his future at Atletico Madrid. I mean, there's some Premier League clubs sniffing around him at the moment. Could a sensational return to the Premier League be happening for the Argentinian? Because I tell you what, he ain't had a bad career at Atletico Madrid as well.
No, he's been brilliant. And I wonder with Manchester City and the problems that Erling Haaland is having at the moment, do they regret letting him go? Because they haven't really got a like-for-like replacement for Haaland. They signed Omar Marmoush, but I think the jury is still out on him. And Diego Simeone and those Atletico fans absolutely love Julian Alvarez, and with good reason. He's a World Cup winner as well. So, yeah, what a signing it would be for a club in the Premier League. It's not the type of deal that gets done in January, but Chelsea have been mentioned as a potential summer destination. I think it will take big money. There's talk of a €100 million price tag that Atletico have put on his head. It's not really the Chelsea way because he's 25, so he's going to be 26 next birthday. I know they ruled out signing João Paulinho when he was at Fulham because at 26 they felt he was too old. They prefer players that they can sign for a decent fee and then maybe sell on for value. But he would absolutely transform that Chelsea team because they've got some real quality in there, but they are lacking at the top end of the pitch. They took a punt on Liam Delap. That's not really worked out yet, mainly due to injury and suspension. João Pedro is a number 10 more than a number 9. So if they could get someone who could come in and score 20 goals a season in the Premier League, then all of a sudden I think you'd have to take them very seriously. There's also talk of Barcelona looking to raid their Spanish rivals, but I'm not sure where they're going to get €100 million from.
Yeah, it's always weird with Barcelona. They seem to pop up with a bit of cash. Obviously, must have a bit of a GoFundMe going on over in Barcelona for some of these players. Crookie, just a couple of follow-up questions on Julian Alvarez. What would it look like for Manchester City if he was going to get a big move to Chelsea? What fees could they expect in the sense of that deal and sell on?
Well, it was a record sale when he went to Atletico, and it seemed big money at the time, but I think he's more than repaid it. City are usually very shrewd when it comes to selling their players. There would usually be a sell-on clause. So obviously if Atletico were to make a profit, then you would expect City to benefit from that. Would they consider bringing him back potentially at the end of the season? That would be an interesting little dilemma as well.
Chelsea as well, and I'll add this on there as well. Obviously, you got Nicholas Jackson, who's over in Munich at the moment. What would that look like for his future? Do you reckon Chelsea probably, if they were to bring in Julian Alvarez in the summer, cut their losses with Nicholas Jackson?
Well, first and foremost, it doesn't look like Bayern Munich are particularly keen to exercise the buy option that they included in that loan deal. So I think Nicholas Jackson will be a Chelsea player come the summer. Clearly that they want to move in a different direction. I don't think it's necessarily been a deal that's worked out for either party. He's not pulled up any trees in Germany. Chelsea have been lacking. Actually, Scott Minto, former Chelsea player, obviously has a big affection still for his former club. He said numerous times on the Premier League All Access podcast that he would take Nicholas Jackson back in a heartbeat. He feels he would really improve this team, but I'm not sure that the hierarchy and the sporting directors there, they've got about 6 of them, necessarily agree with Minto.
Why, in your opinion, Crookie, obviously the move from Ipswich to Chelsea was always going to be a big one. Why has it not really worked out for Liam Delap, in your opinion?
I think injuries have played a big part. He's had a couple of spells on the sideline, so he's been a little bit unlucky. But it was always a punt with Delap. It was a no-brainer of a deal, really, when you looked at how low the release clause was. Someone who scored goals in the first half of the last Premier League season. They did dry up in the second when Ipswich were really struggling. But I think they felt, again, it fits their business model. Buy someone for £30 million, he scores a few goals, then maybe you sell him on, at least get your money back or potentially turn a profit. I'm not sure they ever saw him as someone who could fill the void left by the likes of Didier Drogba, but he is still young, so there's still plenty of time for him to improve and hopefully, from his perspective, just stay fully fit.
Manuel Ugarte's future at Manchester United. I can remember when Ugarte signed and all of the Manchester United fans, they were so happy that the centre defensive midfielder was coming from PSG, and it's just not worked out. Where could he be heading this January transfer window?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about Ajax showing an interest in Ugarte. I think if Manchester United were able to sign a midfielder in this window, and I mentioned in my notebook on the website this week that they've spoken to Wilfred Ndidi, they've been offered Ruben Loftus-Cheek as well, then I think they would be more open to letting Ugarte leave. But obviously at the moment, he's still a key part of the first team. He came on in that Manchester derby late on off the bench. So I think they would want a replacement first. From his perspective, I think he'd be keen to go. And I think long-term, his future does lie away from Old Trafford, be that now or be that in the upcoming summer window.
With you being the chief football correspondent and also a Manchester United fan as well, in your opinion, Crookie, why has it not worked for a player like Ugarte, who had so much pedigree?
He did at the start of his career, but I'm not sure his stock was particularly high when he came to United. And I look at him and it just strikes me as someone who's probably not quite got the pace for the Premier League, doesn't really have the legs to get round the midfield in a combative Premier League game. I think he's probably more suited to a European style of play, and that is where Ajax would suit him.
Thomas Frank's future at Tottenham Hotspur. Obviously, Spurs beat Dortmund 2-0 in the Champions League last night. Burnley at the weekend lost to West Ham at the weekend thanks to a Callum Wilson late 90th minute winner. What are you hearing from North London, Crookie? How long could Thomas Frank have left? Has he somehow miraculously got some credit in the bank after beating Dortmund last night?
Well, I don't think it's a great position to get yourselves into if you're a club like Tottenham, whereby your manager's future basically hinges on the outcome of one game. But it did seem to be that way. I think if they'd lost to Dortmund, as most of us expected them to, then we might have been having a different conversation this morning. But as I understand it, Thomas Frank will be in charge for the trip to Burnley at the weekend. I think he still needs a positive result in that game, because there are certainly members of the hierarchy who are hovering over the button to make a change. There's still a bit of unrest in the dressing room as well, but take nothing away from him. When he needed his team to produce a performance, they did. What I also think it highlights, Harry, is the gap in class between the Premier League and the rest. When you look at a Tottenham side who've only won 7 out of their 22 league games, and they've played one of the top teams in Germany off the park. I was watching Arsenal, 7 changes, go to the San Siro and beat Inter with ease. I expect Liverpool to win in Marseille tonight. So I think it's hard to read too much into this result. I think in many ways the Burnley game is going to be much more crucial to Thomas Frank's future, because their form in Europe, particularly at home, has been very good.
Where would Spurs go then if they were to get rid of Thomas Frank? We get this question so much, but it doesn't seem like there's going to be an outright manager to come through and take over the role, because we speak about current Premier League managers, your Marco Silvas, your Andoni Iriolas of the world. But is there someone further afield, potentially in Europe, that could be suited to the role? What have you heard from the sense of what the hierarchy are potentially looking at?
Well, both of those managers you mentioned there, Silva and Iriola, were high in Tottenham's thinking in the summer. Obviously, they decided to go down the Thomas Frank route, and I do wonder if they did sack Frank and brought in Iriola, would he have the same problems that Thomas Frank has experienced, where a lot of Tottenham fans just don't feel like they should be recruiting managers from a club lower down the food chain. The name I keep hearing is Mauricio Pochettino, and I think it's the worst kept secret in football that he would love to go back to Spurs at some point. Obviously, he's committed with the US national team until the World Cup. You don't expect them to go very deep in the draw, so I think he may well be available come the summer, but that would mean if Thomas Frank does go, putting an interim in charge for the rest of the season, and there's no obvious candidate. They've just appointed Johnny Heitinger recently. I guess he could do it, but he didn't cover himself in glory at Ajax, and Ryan Mason is a free agent. Obviously, he's had a couple of caretaker stints, but again, his spell in charge at West Bromwich Albion was a disaster.
It's weird about Pochettino, the Crookie, because, obviously it's said that he's going to be leaving the US national job after the World Cup. Has this appointment, if Poch does go back to Spurs, is this appointment for the US national team almost been like a bit of a publicity stunt to build, to build press and to build hype around, obviously, the 2026 World Cup in North America? Because Pochettino, his options wouldn't have been limited, because he's one of the best managers in the world. He just left Chelsea and he could have had a couple of months off. The move to the US, I thought, was really bizarre. And now, with him being linked to the Spurs job and leaving when the World Cup comes to end, it feels a bit weird to me. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I think it's a very lucrative contract that he's on when you take into account all the bonus content built into it. So financially, I think he's done very well. But I agree with you. Is it almost an acceptance that he wasn't going to get another top job in Europe or the Premier League? And he's been mentioned as a potential Manchester United manager. I think they probably will have their sights set a little bit higher. So I would say Tottenham is more likely. But I think your question is fair. And you look at the results, he's not exactly pulled up too many trees over there, is he, either in the States in terms of the friendly game. So I think there's an awful lot of pressure on Pochettino going into this World Cup to prove his reputation as a top coach remains intact.
Aston Villa are in a search for a new striker as well. There was links to obviously Tammy Abraham. Daniel Marlon has left for Roma, which I thought was very, very strange because I actually thought he had a decent start to the season. Could a Mr. Jean-Philippe Mateta be leading the line for Aston Villa alongside Oliver Watkins?
I think it'd be a good signing for Villa. Someone who's proven in the Premier League. Someone who misses a lot of chances, actually, but he gets himself in a position to get those chances. Not an easy deal to do in terms of an asking price from Palace and also his wage demands. I think one of the reasons he wants to leave Selhurst Park is because he's not on brilliant money in Premier League terms, and he'd be looking for in the region of 150 grand a week. But they're looking at alternatives, Villa, because the deal for Tammy Abraham is complicated. Is he a Roma player? Is he a Besiktas player? Well, Turkish sources are suggesting that Besiktas feel they've already activated a buy obligation in his loan deal. So I think that's one of the stumbling blocks that Villa have got to get over. But definitely they're looking for more firepower. They've recalled Leon Bailey from his loan spell away from the club, having let Daniel Marlon leave. But they can't just rely on Ollie Watkins as the only out-and-out striker for the rest of the season. Certainly not if they want to launch any kind of title bid. But obviously they've got the Europa League as well. They're one of the favourites for that competition. And they do look light at the top end of the pitch.
What does the future look like for Evan Guesson as well? I mean, it's not really worked for him at Aston Villa, and reports this morning that he could be out.
Yeah, he's one of the names that's been mentioned for Crystal Palace if they do sell Mateta, because, again, they're going to need someone to play up top for them. I think Eddie Nketiah is still injured. Jorgen Strand-Larsen is a possibility. The sporting director there, Matt Hobbs, was instrumental in bringing him to the Premier League when he was at Wolves, so certainly keep an eye on that one. But I'm not sure that Guessand is quite up to being the main man up front for a team with aspirations to push for a European place. I've not seen enough from him at Aston Villa to suggest he's that guy.
Ruben Loftus-Cheek, is it true that he could potentially be going to Aston Villa, and obviously an offer from Manchester United as well?
Yes, he's been touted around for a return to the Premier League. Manchester United, one of the clubs that his advisors have spoken to. I think Villa probably more likely, bearing in mind that Abubakar Kamara has just been ruled out for the rest of the season. He's been such a key player for them. It's quite similar to the Conor Gallagher situation, really, with Loftus-Cheek. I think he feels, having been recalled after a 7-year absence by Thomas Tuchel, played in the friendly against Wales early last year, that if he's playing regularly in the Premier League, he might have a chance to get a seat on the plane for the World Cup next summer.
That's the thing as well. I mean, when he was at Chelsea, there was, he has such a high ceiling. I remember when he came on loan to Fulham and he was absolutely dreadful. But I mean, you're looking at sort of like this situation, and we see Jack Grealish, obviously, what you broke yesterday, that he'll be, his World Cup will be in tatters. But if that's what Ruben Loftus-Cheek needs to do and, get more eyes from Thomas Tuchel, then, he could be on that plane to the World Cup. Where would you think he'll be best suited? Is it going into Manchester United, or keep him sort of a more low profile and Aston Villa? Because whenever someone goes to Manchester United, it feels a bit of a poison chalice. It's almost a place where, you're not exactly getting a free hit at Manchester United because you're always going to be under scrutiny.
I think that's a really interesting question, because it certainly was one that was rumbling around the head of Conor Gallagher. Does he go to Villa and not necessarily be a guaranteed starter week in, week out because he's got so many options in midfield? Or does he go to Spurs where he's basically going to be the main man? I think it's a similar situation to Loftus-Cheek, although would he necessarily be nailed on for a place in that United 11, bearing in mind how well Kobbie Mainoo did in the derby that weekend? They got Casemiro there as well, but then you look at Villa, John McGinn, when he's fit, and obviously he picked up an injury issue at the weekend, is pretty much nailed on to play. They've got Onana, who's hopefully is going to come back from injury. Yuri Tillemans, I think, is a terrific player. So, it's a really interesting question. I guess you might argue the environment at Aston Villa is more set up for him to succeed and produce the type of performance levels that he would need to force his way into that England squad, because he's quite a long way down the list, isn't he, in terms of central midfielders that Thomas Tuchel can choose from.
The future of young Arsenal player Ethan Nwaneri as well, over the last 24, 48 hours, a lot of rumours around his potential moves, low moves as well. Is it true that he could be going to France?
Yeah, there has been Premier League interest, but I think Arsenal preferred to send him abroad. West Ham had an offer rejected earlier in the window to sign him on loan, and maybe they felt like going to play for Roberto De Zerbi and play Champions League football in the second half of the season was a better option than joining a relegation fight. I think on his part, Nwaneri just wants to go out and play. He's only made 6 sub-appearances in the Premier League this season, having penned a new contract last summer. And there's so much competition at Arsenal, isn't there? They made 7 changes, as I mentioned, against Inter Milan and still won comfortably. It's interesting there's no buy option included in the deal, because that is a reflection that Arsenal still see him very much as a player for the future. But what happens if he absolutely goes and thrives in France, plays week in, week out? Does he suddenly then try and push for a permanent exit?
That's the weird thing as well. Obviously, you mentioned about all the changes and whatnot, but we're seeing a lot with Arsenal and Mikel Arteta. Rotation is a weird thing at Arsenal because they're so stuck in the ways of keeping Bukayo Saka on that right wing, where Ethan Nwaneri, if Saka needs a rest, because obviously we always know that Saka's always limping no matter what minute it is in the game. He's always a bit of a meme. But you look at Martin Odegaard and obviously look at Eberici Eze as well. I don't know what you think about this, Crook, but I thought this about Arsenal for a long time, that players like Bukayo Saka, I don't think will have the longevity in their career because Mikel Arteta just burns them out. And you look at sort of like, some games, if it's the cup and it's you talk about the sort of like the 6 games off of the bench. I know obviously Mikel Arteta wants to win trophies at Arsenal. Last one winning was the FA Cup in about 2020, 2021, whenever it was during COVID. That he's not rotating enough, in my opinion. And I think someone of Ethan Nwaneri's quality should be getting starts in the cup for Arsenal and throw him in the deep end in the Premier League as well. Because I'm not saying this as like I'm sort of like baiting Arsenal out. I think Bukayo Saka could do with a rest because I don't think he's been on top form for the majority of this season. I think they need something fresh going down that right-hand side.
Yeah, I think he's got a bit better, Arteta, this season. He at least takes Saka off for games. Obviously, he left him out altogether, or left him on the bench for the Forest 0-0 draw at the weekend. He made 10 changes in the FA Cup against Portsmouth, 7 more against Inter in midweek. But I do take on board your point. I actually don't think Bukayo Saka is having a brilliant season, by the way. I think if you look at his numbers, particularly in terms of scoring goals, he's dropped off a little bit, and maybe that is a byproduct that he's played too much football, and that could be a concern for England going to the World Cup. Definitely when Nwaneri signed that contract, and similar with Miles Lewis-Skelly as well, I think they both thought they would get more Premier League minutes than they have this season. And in the case of Lewis-Skelly, it's probably going to count him out of a place in England's World Cup squad, whereas at one stage, he seemed to be Thomas Tuchel's first choice left back.
Is there no movements on him as well, if he could get a loan move? Or is that completely nothing there whatsoever?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Obviously, there's big issues with Riccardo Calafiori in terms of he keeps picking up these little niggly injuries, and Lewis-Skelly is the next natural left back. You could play Urian Timber there or maybe Ben White, but I think all the time that Calafiori struggles to stay fit, then they'll keep Lewis-Skelly in the building. And he seems quite relaxed about that, despite the fact, as I say, it might cost him a place in the US. He's not pushing for a move, as I understand it.
Right, on to the good stuff then. Who would have thought, recording right now, we're going to discuss 2 Fulham transfers. This never happens, ever. I was off ill from work yesterday, and of course, gave me a lot of free time just to, scan on Fulham fan news and stuff like that, Fulham transfer news, and of course, keeping up to date with yourself and Ben Jacobs as well. Oscar Bobb, his future at Manchester City, strong links with a move to Fulham. Crookie, what is going on? What's the possibility Fulham are going to win the Premier League in the next 2 to 3 years, aren't they?
Well, listen, I think Oscar Bobb would be a terrific signing for Fulham. It wasn't that long ago that he was making a man of the match performance in the Community Shield for City against United. And you thought then he would have a big season last year. Obviously, he's picked up an injury, and that really has derailed him. And now they've got Semenyo, they've still got Savinho there, they've got Doku as well. So it's difficult to see how he really forced his way into the Manchester City team. Fulham are one of the clubs who've certainly held conversations with City. I think it's quite advanced in terms of a potential permanent transfer. They want a fee of about 30 to 35 million pounds. But I think Oscar Bobb is someone who could really go and thrive under Marco Silva. And who knows, it might just help convince your manager to sign a new contract, because, of course, there's no obvious signs of progress there yet, although I am told privately Fulham are more confident they can get him to commit his future than maybe they were a few weeks ago.
I think we're going to be sticking with Fulham for this next person, Crookie. I can't believe that I'm saying this. And another name that was rumoured to us in the transfer window in the summer is Raheem Sterling. I know Liam Rossignol in his his press conference, ahead of Chelsea versus Paphos in the Champions League, was talking about Axel Disasi, and he said that every single player has a clean slate with him. He's booked in meetings, he's had conversations with the people that were sort of cast out of the first team and made to go and train with the reserves and under 21s, under 10s, no matter what it is, they've been excluded, and Raheem Sterling's one of those names. What's the future looking like for Raheem Sterling? Because there's a lot of rumours that he wants to stay in London, Fulham, like I mentioned, in the summer, and I was reading something this morning that he's still interested in a move to Craven Cottage. Could this be the move as well that sort of, restarts Raheem Sterling's career as well? I think off the top of my head, and you'd agree with me on this one, Raheem Sterling's one of those players that's been around for what feels like decades, but Raheem Sterling's only about 29 or 28 years old. And I mean, I think the money that he's going to be looking for is quite substantial. Is that the thing that could break sort of break the camel's back, in the sense of Fulham aren't going to be able to compete with the wage demand that he's going to have?
Yeah, because he's on in excess of £300,000 a week at Chelsea. But I guess there comes a stage when you've accumulated as much wealth as Raheem Sterling has, where you decide actually it's more important to go out and play and take advantage of the peak years of my career than it is just to pick up a pay packet. Having said that, when you've been treated as badly as he has by Chelsea, I'm sure there's part of him that just wants to dig in and keep taking their money. Disasi is back training with the first team. He has been this week in the build-up to their Champions League game against Paphos. So Sterling is now the only member of that so-called bomb squad still on the books who isn't part of the picture when it comes to first team. I'm told that one of his preferences has always been to go and play for Marco Silva at Fulham. He wants to stay in London. He believes that Marco Silva would be a manager to reignite his career. But I think Chelsea are going to have to make it worth his while. I think the only way he goes, it's a permanent deal. He's not interested, I'm told, in going on loan, or certainly wasn't coming into this window. So I think there's going to have to be a bit of negotiation over the remainder of his contract.
Do you reckon, obviously you said you want to stay in London, it didn't work out at Arsenal at the back end of last season as well. Is there anything that could be swaying him towards a move to Europe, or do European clubs not want to take a punt on him? And it's so sad to say about Raheem Sterling, because you think about, the rise at Liverpool, and you're talking about how the goal getter that he was really at Manchester City, so integral in that Centurion season at Manchester City, one of the best teams that we've ever seen in the Premier League. The move to Chelsea just hasn't worked at all, and it really pains me to say this, because everything that he did in an England shirt as well was sensational. It stinks a bit of Jesse Lingard going to South Korea. I hate to say this, but if he doesn't get this move to Fulham, after Fulham, then it looks like potentially a move to the MLS. That the fall from grace with Raheem Sterling needs to be studied, and it, just as a football fan in general, it just makes me feel a bit sad in a case of maybe Raheem Sterling peaked a bit too soon.
Yeah, and I think sometimes Sterling is underappreciated. When you look how good he was that year that Liverpool nearly won the title, playing alongside Suarez and Sturridge. Pep loved him at Manchester City. He won plenty of honours there. Obviously was still a big part of the England squad, even as recently as the World Cup in Qatar and the European Championships on home soil. So I think people will only appreciate what a good player he was when he does retire, but he has spent the last couple of years in the wilderness. Bayern Munich were keen to sign him last summer. Vincent Kompany obviously knew him from Manchester City, but I think the interest came too late in the day, really, for him to make it worthwhile. And family is absolutely central to Raheem Sterling and central to his decision-making. That's why I think he wants to stay locally and stay in London, where his kids are obviously being schooled. The MLS has been mentioned before, so Saudi Arabia, but he's never shown any great inclination to make a move to either of those destinations.
Cookies, finish off the episode then. You got some transfer news from the Championship, and everyone, you quote me and said, everyone, half of the Championship wants his signature. Who is it? What's happening?
It's Joel Perreault at Leeds, who obviously scored a lot of goals to get them into the Premier League last season. Hasn't so far really been able to translate that to the top flight. He's probably third in line, isn't he, behind Metcha, who got that late winner against your beloved Fulham at the weekend, and Calvert-Lewin, who's been among the goals. I think the issue here is, and you're right, half the Championship, Leicester, Middlesbrough, various other clubs who see themselves as being able to compete for a place in the Premier League would like to sign him. He's on big money. I think he got a pay rise as a result of Leeds' promotion, and maybe that explains why he's keen to stay and, quotes, fight for his place at Ellen Road.
You've been watching The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place.